Okay, so it's Friday, July 24th, 2020. Thanks everybody for joining us. We're going to spend about 12, 13 minutes together today and cover a couple of things that we're thinking about here at First Option Bank. Some of the things that we're watching that are normal, some of the things we're watching that are a little abnormal, and take a look at what's happening. So our first chart, we're going to look at the daily movement of the Dow. And Mallory is again helping us find the big blue curtain. And she's going to bring up our chart for daily Dow movement versus the 7-day and 14-day moving average in just a second. But one thing I'll observe while she's bringing that up is what we're seeing that's good is that our daily average since mid-March continues to increase. So obviously that first day when we start tracking it was a bad day. And now we're down to where our daily average is down a little bit, but it's fractional. And you can see that in this chart over on the far right-hand side. You can see that this is still flattening. We talked about this last week. And again, you've got the 7-day moving average. The daily's in blue. The 7-day is kind of orange. And then the 14-day is the silver color. And you can see those are kind of remaining flat. That's actually really good news. We talked about different structures of the recovery, whether it be a V or a W or a swoosh. And we kind of have a swoosh going on. She just charted there. And you can see that that flattening part, that is not bad news. It's actually reasonable for us to sit back and say, okay, we're seeing some things calm down. A couple things are causing that. Number one is that the market in general, we've always said that it just generally doesn't like what it doesn't know. So when things are unknown, it tends to be a little more erratic. Things are calming down. We're starting to get used to the new normal, whatever that ends up being. And so our stock market's kind of stabilizing. That part's good. The part that we need to be wary of is going into the future. We have a couple things to consider, and those are coming up. First off, earnings season. We're solidly into the first half of the year, the second quarter of the year, earnings season. We're seeing some numbers, and they're not great, but they also aren't unexpected. And the market tends to understand what's going to happen and know that ahead of time. So we're not seeing stuff that's shocking us too much. The Delta loss was high, but it's not unexpected. You see a couple of other companies that are reporting losses, but again, they weren't unexpected. So far there really hasn't been any surprises, and that's good news. The next thing we have to deal with is schools, especially here in Kansas. They've started announcing reopening plans, how they're going to do it, what's going to happen. How that's handled and what happens after they reopen is going to have something to do with the market long term. As long as we're able to do this, we're able to do it safely, then this flat line that you're seeing over on the right, that probably will stay where it is for a bit. I don't anticipate that moving a whole lot over the next 8 to 10 to 12 weeks. The next thing to worry about is the election. And that's going to be kind of a pivotal moment. What happens right now, it depends on the poll, but they're bouncing up and down. The spread's about 8 points on who is favored against who is not. And that's not a huge margin. There's still things you need to talk about, what the polls do, how right they are, and that thing that Richard Nixon brought about in 1972, which was called the silent majority, which is the people that sit back and they end up voting the way they want to vote, and they're not really involved in the polls. Those are big factors to consider. And that's how we're going to go. And a lot of that depends on Biden's running mate, who he picks, and that's going to have some impact. Probably more than any other vice presidential impact in years. So we have that. And then we have obviously the vaccine, COVID vaccine, who's going to get it, who's going to figure it out, how many are going to figure it out. It's impossible for us to pick and put our money on one horse in that race. We've got Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson. There's quite a few out there that are working on something, including just Oxford University. So there's no real way to try and figure out which horse you want to put that money on, but one of those guys will figure it out, and that vaccine will have a direct impact on where this Dow goes in the future. So going forward over the next 3 or 4 months, those are the factors that we're considering, and those are the stuff that we have to keep in mind as we're making our plans, and they do have an impact. This is a pretty volatile time in our history, and so when we're doing our planning, those are things that we know could impact us one way or another. And it's kind of like looking at a map with 6 different options, and every time you make an option, the other 6 change. So that's where we'll go. And then finally, the other factor that's going to change all this is confidence in travel. How this goes over the next couple of months and the confidence of the Americans to travel and where to travel, how far to go, how they're going to travel, that does have an impact. It has an impact on travel and leisure, obviously, but also on the demand for petroleum, oil, gas. It has a demand for all of that, and for the service sector. So there's a lot of things going on right now, and what we're hoping that we just gradually adapt to this new normal, and we start to see these over on the right-hand side start to trail up a bit. And so Mallory, if you go to the next slide, please. And you're going to see here, this is the part where I am a little bit worried about. You can see the blue line shows the increase in unemployment, and that really shot up. That was not unexpected at all. And then the orange line is the average unemployment. And the good part about that is it shows you that over time, it did, of course, it had an impact, but it wasn't a draconian impact. What I'm a little worried about is over here that what we're not picking up because it's small is there was a little bump this week on unemployment. I'm curious about where that goes next. We had a pretty solid slide down here from early April. We started seeing a slide down. It was a nice slide, pretty good, about 50% of the rate that we went up. And that's a nice, decent decline in unemployment filings. My concern is over here on the far right-hand side, we're starting to see a little bit of an uptick that's small enough that you can't really see it on this chart. And I'm a little bit worried about that. We'll see where we stand a week from today when we have the unemployment numbers for next week, and we make the adjustments for the previous month. And that's kind of what happens. Those numbers are an estimate, and then we look back over 4 weeks and we make our final adjustments. So we'll see where all that goes. And Mallory, the next one, please. This chart is when we're looking at all this, we're kind of a micro view. This is more of a macro view of the stock market over 25 years. And the thing that's important to remember, Mallory, if you go one more, please, I think. That's not it. I'm sorry. Go back. So what you're seeing in here back in this first little bump down right here, and then you see the second bump or drop. There you go, Mallory, right back here. And then you see where she's pointing now. Those are all factors that affected the economy in general. But our point here is that you can see if you step back and you avoid looking at those, you make good decisions. As long as you're in a long-term plan, you're going to be okay. You'll have some valleys that you have to deal with. And we are now in kind of a valley. If you go over to the far right-hand side, this is very dramatic. You can see that drop is pretty steep. And it is a lot to put up with. The one thing I want to touch on is I had someone ask about, is this like 1987? It is not. 1987, for us to have a day like we had that October, the market would have to go down about 5,800 points in one day. And there's a lot to get into and explain why that can't happen now, but it can't. We have circuit breakers that drop in and they stop trading at certain times. We haven't seen those in a while. We've seen them 4 times in the last about 7 weeks, and they did their job. So I'm not too worried about us seeing anything like that. And again, if we remember that first chart I showed, we're starting to see some flattening out. So our confidence is stable. We're seeing some volatility that is really starting to flatten. We're seeing consumer confidence is kind of increasing. There are other talks about what kind of recovery we could see in new form, and we're just going to stick with what we're seeing right now. It appears to be the Nike swoosh, and we're prepared to see a W, or we may see another decline depending on those factors I talked about earlier, which is schools and how they weather this, and the election and vaccine and things like that. So the other thing that I want to point out is that every election year always is volatile, always has been historically. And so it's not abnormal for us to be in that position again. We're not in any kind of panic mode at all. We're just solidly planning for the facts that we have, dealing with it. We don't think that we need to be at 50% cash. We don't think we need to be selling out accounts. We just think we need to keep doing what we do, which is to say good stuff, watch for our financials. Our dividends are not getting reduced, which is great. Typically, when you see the economy turn down, you see companies start to cut their dividend back. Dividends come from profits. We're not seeing that this time. So that's good. They're keeping those dividends up, and we like to see that. If they start cutting them, then we're going to be a little bit more concerned. So here we are, July 24th. We're through 7 months of the year, essentially. We have a few more to go. And then there's a couple of theories on what happens over the last quarter of the year, and I think those are valid theories, and all of them are very positive. So while we want to take the bad stuff with a grain of salt, we also want to take the good stuff with a grain of salt. We have a couple of theories that put the S&P 500 solidly about 35% higher than it is right now. That's not out of the realm. And we also have a Dow that's starting to push on where it was on January the 1st. So after all of this volatility, we could end up with a year where we are plus or minus 2%, probably more on the minus 2% from where we were at the beginning. And if you recall that 25-year chart we had up a second ago, you can see over the long term, we've just had a really good run. So our insight on all of this is to remain cautious, to remain positive, and just make sure that what you're doing are solid decisions. And anybody that wants help will guide you through that. This is not a recommendation to buy or sell any securities at all. It's just a recommendation that when you structure your portfolio and you try and consider what you want to do, that you consider all these things as factors. So that's where we are. Next week, we're going to delve into a couple of little different things as we go forward, and as we start reaching it. We might start talking about polls and the economy. We always want to be careful when we do that. We'll start looking at some specifics as far as how things are starting to shake out. And if we're still seeing that flat movement, relatively flat Dow, flat 7-day, flat 14-day moving average, then we're feeling really good about how things are going. So that ends this week. Again, if you have any questions, we've got Mallory Vaughn as our producer. She's really awesome, sets everything up and just tells me when to start talking, which is great. And so her email is mvaugghn@firstoptionbank.com. My email is mmccauley@firstoptionbank.com. But mail us any questions you have. Short of talking specifically about a stock, we'll be happy to work it into our Friday morning program. This is going to be a hot weekend. Stay cool, stay out of the heat, and enjoy yourselves. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.